Okay, our next item I'm presenting to the board, and this is also around a school board decision, annual school board decision that comes up around transfers. And you have in front of you a memo that you've been able to see ahead of time describing both of the transfer processes and decisions before you. In the past, I will share that we have typically dealt with House Bill 3681 one month and then interdistrict transfers the next month. And we felt that more and more as we're used to both of these items, that separating them may not be as needed around learning and discussion, and that we could bring them both forward the same month. Also, I think it helps our community. When we make a decision about open enrollment, they have to wait a whole another month for the board to then discuss interdistrict transfers. And Kelly's phone lights up for a whole month about what she predicts the board will do with that, and so I think it'll ease our community's minds that we can get both of those decisions taken care of tonight. So what we have before you is House Bill 3681, which is around open enrollment, and you know that statute by now. And essentially it's asking the board to make a decision about whether to open for students who live outside the district to attend our school through this process. This process is different from the interdistrict transfers in that in open enrollment, if a school district declares itself open, then the sending school district cannot deny the transfer. In the interdistrict transfer process, the sending school district can deny the application. So this is completely open as long as the district receiving has declared itself open. And we've talked as a staff and considered our capacity across our schools, our growing enrollment, that we are looking at an updated demographic projection that will help guide a lot of decisions. And are making this recommendation to the board that we, again, for the second year, not open, but allow our schools to adjust to some of the boundaries that we've made, the transportation patterns, seeing where our schools settle as we've tried to adjust for our increasing enrollment increase, and want to monitor that closely and at least have 2 years to take a look at if there's a trend or a pattern. 1 year is just 1 year, and often we allow folks to finish where they are, but if we can have a couple or 3 years here where we see the impact of adjustments across the district and with a new school that opened, we think it'll serve the board as well as staff really well to see where numbers fall in terms of across our schools. So that's the first recommendation, and I'll let you kind of interact with that one and ask questions. And you may even decide that you want to make a motion on that one, or we could then move and discuss interdistrict transfers, and you could hear about that from me, and then do all the voting at the end. But I'll pause there and let you ask whatever questions you have about open enrollment and the staff's recommendation.
I had a question about just the mechanics of it. Mm-hmm. For open enrollment, can we say we allow, like, let's say we want to target students towards Beckman Creek, but not Trillium? Can we target which schools they go to?
Yes, that is in the provision. You can either open fully across the district and not make any specifics, or you can select certain levels, or, and I mean by even grade levels, and schools, which we have done in the past. I think the first year we were the broadest, and it was a new law for all school districts, and folks were unsure what kind of interest the community would have and what kind of decisions folks would make. And so I think school districts were quite broad in the first couple years, and then increasingly became more specific around really thinking of the impact, whether on a primary, middle, or high school. And so each year, we would ask the board to make a decision about which schools and even how many slots per grade level or grade bands
that targeting, is that a pretty inexact science? Because you might get exactly the right student you want at the right grade level, but he or she might have 4 brothers and sisters that come along. I mean, or when you bring somebody in, do you ask them, okay, how many siblings do you have, and are the, you know?
You have to be really careful what questions you ask, because there can't be bias in, and so it really is an opening. And you know, what school are you interested in? What's your preference, and what grade level? We did consider if they already have siblings at the school district. You can ask about that.
And so the memo we received said that there's limited capacity across a number of schools in the district. So should I assume when I read that that means that there are no schools that you feel, or the district feels, that we want to put any more students into that right now we're at the optimal level or higher?
So last year, when we made this similar recommendation, it came because of noticing the enrollment that moved from primary then into middle, and we hadn't opened Meridian Creek yet, and we didn't know what was going to happen in terms of how many students would end up being enrolled there, so there are a lot of unknowns. And there's increasing concern, too, about our high schools, and we know that that's a future consideration for the school board at some point around watching the increases there. So once a student comes in, they're in through the duration of their educational career, so you have to kind of plan for that number moving through the levels. So that's where we were making some decisions, too, around reducing the numbers increasingly of how many students could be at the middle and high school. Always we were a little more generous at the primary levels because that's where we had more space, but aware that these primary students then move into middle and high school, and wanted to be really mindful of the impact there.
I have a similar question. Could a school district designate a particular geographic area as an area by which we would take interdistrict transfers or open enrollment, as opposed to designating school?
Are you talking about within our district or from areas?
Outside?
You cannot. In the first year, in the first iterations of the open enrollment statute, that was not specified, and that was actually occurring. And by that next year, the legislation had amended that statute to make sure that there wasn't a geographical component to where we would draw from, where a school district would draw from.
So just for clarification, if we wanted to say Charbonneau is an area we'll take students from, but nowhere else, that's prevented by the statute.
Correct.
Want to vote? Okay.
So, Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the board declare the West Linn-Wilsonville School District not open for House Bill 3681 open enrollments for the 2018-19 school year.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Dylan Hides.
I just wanted to say that I've been opposed to open enrollments on principle for many years, just because I think it's destabilizing for districts, and I don't think it's consistent with the principles of public education, particularly around equity of access. And it's always been my thought that extraordinary circumstances can be addressed through interdistrict transfer law and policy. And I know that interdistrict transfer laws have been modified over the years. The open enrollment law was supposed to sunset this session, but there's a bill to extend it just because some of those interdistrict transfer policies still need to be stabilized. So I just hope that in the future, again, that this district can address unusual circumstances through the interdistrict transfer process, and that's the way that the legislative developments progress.
Dylan Hides,
Aye.
Ginger Fitch,
Aye.
Regan Molitor,
Yes.
Betty Reynolds.
Aye.
Thank you. The next decision before the board is on inter-district transfers. And again, this is students outside the district who wish to transfer into the district, not during that month of open enrollment, but outside of that. When that window closes, families still have an opportunity to submit a transfer request. It also includes students inside our district who wish to transfer outside to another school district. And so you have a decision before you on how to create those, how to outline those conditions. So if you look at the second page of your memo, I think that helps to succinctly describe that. And again, staff spent quite a bit of time in conversation, looking at our schools, looking at how to also consider families who are already in the district, and thinking about continuity for students. And so we're proposing a similar recommendation to what we proposed and had approved by the school board last year. And that is to allow inter-district transfers for the 18-19 school year, but only to non-resident students who are currently attending our schools and siblings of those non-resident students currently attending our schools. This does mean that we are making a statement that no new families would be accepted. We have thriving preschools in a lot of our schools, and sometimes families outside the district who might be taking advantage of our preschool program may think that the student is formally in the district, but actually they're not. Preschool is not mandatory, so it's an option program. So just want to be clear that this pertains to K-12. And that we do have then some inter-district transfers that would be closed even under those circumstances for some of our schools, and that is Lowry and Trillium Primary School, Rosemont Ridge, and Art Tech for program reasons and capacity reason. So for example, if a family did choose to leave the school district but wanted to still remain somehow, have their student connected in the school district to finish their educational career, those schools would not be an option if they had been there, but our other schools in the district would be. There are families who may not get a release from their school district but want the opportunity to pay through tuition to continue in the school district, and like last year, we were agreeable to that as long as it met the criteria above. These are being students who already were here and wanted to continue, or siblings. So this wouldn't be any other new circumstances or open to new families. This would still pertain to non-resident students currently attending or their siblings. And then how long to keep that process open so that we can look at numbers and staff accordingly. We've put an end date of June 15th, so essentially a week after school gets out, or close to a few days after school gets out, so that secretaries can finalize those and get the information to principals as well as to families. But beginning in March, anytime a family could put that request in and get approval, but we wouldn't take any new requests after June 15th. And then the part 2 of that, students who are requesting to leave the school district to attend another school district, we are, our policy states that we don't approve out-of-district transfers without exception from the school board, and this gives you that provision of exception. And last year we gave 20 spots, and so we're recommending the same 20 requests be honored for students who wish to leave the school district. And then if we have more than 20 requests right away on April 1st, which would be the start date, then we would give priority to high school students, and then to middle school and primary, and then siblings, and then any new requests. But typically we haven't in the past had them all flood in on April 1st, so we've just approved them as we've gone along so that families can make plans accordingly. Questions about all of that? That was a lot.
I'm confused about the art tech.
So art tech is what we've typically prioritized. That is for our own students who live in the district, and making sure that we have the staffing and the program availability there. So we have not ever opened that for out-of-district students. It remains an in-district student program.
I had a couple questions. So if we pass this tonight, my understanding is that no non-resident family who's currently in the district will be forced to leave the district or change schools. Is that right?
Correct. So if they happen to move over the summer, move in the spring, but they want their children to finish, we will approve their transfer request.
And the same question that Chair Fitch had with respect to open enrollment, can we target certain areas like Charbonneau can transfer in, but nobody else? Did it have to be open to every community in the state?
The state has been really clear about not doing geographical targeting. Sometimes it gets confused with vetting for certain groups of students over others, and around biases, or could open the door for that type of concern by parents who may feel they were denied because they lived in a certain geographical zip code or area, for reasons that I don't think the board would intend, but it certainly opens that door to possibility.
Thank you.
So Director Reynolds, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Dr. Reynolds made a reference to, I thought, agreements between districts. Are there agreements that exist outside these two opportunities, say with Sherwood or Lake Oswego?
For next year, or this last year?
Generally,
Exchanges
yeah.
between districts?
Yeah, it's been a while since I don't know currently, I haven't checked, but there have been times when school districts in a county have, and I think what Dr. Reynolds was referring to is also how are we good neighbors to each other, that we're not drawing students away from other school districts. And prior to even House Bill 3681, there were often agreements between school districts around how many students they might approve to come in the effort to address that type of concern that she raises around really encouraging folks to attend their neighborhood schools, their school districts, and not depleting enrollments from surrounding areas. So I would have to look into that in terms of what are current agreements between school districts today, or whether they have those posted or what they're planning to do for next year. I'm not up to date on that.
So if we have areas in our district that we have areas in our community, for instance, that are within the city of Wilsonville, but are within the Sherwood School District, those have to be handled within the interdistrict transfer.
Mm-hmm.
I just appreciate the thought that's been given to ensure that if we have non-resident students currently attending, that they can continue, which has just kind of been a guiding principle of students in our schools. Like, once they're in, we welcome them, we want you here to the end, as well as then also the notion of, again, trying to keep our families together and whatnot. And I feel that this strikes a very good balance of honoring kind of our obligations to existing students and families, as well as ensuring reserving room for growth as our students move through our system.
I wanted to clarify what I said and what Chair Fitch said, that the reason why we're asking about carving out geographic areas isn't because the board prefers certain areas, but because we've had questions from constituents who have said, hey, look, I live really close to the district. This school in Wilsonville or Westland's actually closer than my other school. Can you guys make an exception for my neighborhood? And so that's why we're just looking for a way to maybe make that happen. But what we're learning tonight is there's no legal way for us to do that. I will make a motion that the board approve the policy with respect to interdistrict transfers as laid out in Dr. Ludwig's memo of February 5th, 2018.
I second.
Is there any discussion? Further discussion?
I do have a question for Dr. Ludwig, and I was just curious about the decline. Let's see, the number of non-resident students and how many have entered at any time in the last 13 years. I wondered why the number went down by 112 between last year and this year. Do we know the bases? I think there are 7 criteria that are listed, and I was just wondering, do we know the bases for why we saw that decline?
The decline went down because the board last year voted to approve what is on the table tonight, to close for open enrollment and to limit the number of interdistrict transfers. So that was a large part of that decline, with no new families being considered or approved to come into the district. So I included those numbers because we've heard from community a wonder about the number of out-of-resident students attending our schools. We're watching the number internally for all the reasons that have been stated, as well as what you mentioned, Dr. Reynolds, about your concern of accepting students from out of the district as well. And so I just wanted to show the impact of what that has, the impact of that on our numbers for primarily those 2 reasons, but there are students that are still coming to us that we cannot say no to, and I wanted to make sure you knew some of the parameters. Sometimes a family hears in the community that someone was allowed to come in and they question why, and we have to be real careful because there are other extenuating circumstances such as the ones listed below, such as public safe school choice transfer, court placement, homeless. We also have House Bill 4007, which is mid-year moves, and so sometimes our patrons may not understand that that might be also an effect why a family is staying on, and they may think that we've made an exception for one family over another, and we haven't. So I wanted to list those out for you.
Thank you.
Dylan Hides.
Aye.
Ginger Fitch.
Aye.
Regan Molitor.
Yes.
Betty Reynolds.
Aye.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add that what we will now do then is update our website so families know when this will begin and they know all the conditions as well. So that will be very clear on our website.
Well, Dr. Soyson and I are very excited to share a few thoughts with you about a lot of different programs. And we want to share with you, first of all, that when we first contemplated coming to you with some of what we thought was most important around some key federal programs and other programs to support students, thinking about the kind of detailed reports we sometimes give, just really we're like, wow, that's not going to be possible to give a ton of detail around special education and gifted education and Title I and homeless services in about, 10 minutes. So what we have tried to do is really think about the commonalities behind those programs, which is how we think anyway. And so it actually was a great exercise for us to think about that work together in a very coherent approach and really reflect on how much coherence there is in the ways we support and think about these different programs that provide equity and access for children. So you may have seen one or more of these pictures in the past. And these metaphors have become really important ways to help illustrate some of the constructs that we think about in supporting all children. So it also, as you work your way through these photos or these pictures, it really helps demonstrate the progressive thinking that has happened over time as we think about access for students. And when we first, were thinking years ago about making sure all students had equality, that's a construct that we think about, and there are places where that still fits, even if we were thinking about interdistrict transfers, for example. We wanted to have equality in not supporting some students over others. That's very clear in the laws that the state gave us, that everyone would have an equal opportunity to apply for those transfers. And then as we move forward, that second box over on the top right, we've spent a lot of time as a district thinking about equity, really understanding that for students to access and really see over that fence, they don't all need the same things. Some students come to us with a lot of resources and things in their possession around their learning and their support systems where they are just ready to thrive, and no matter what happens. And we have other students that need a boost, and some students need a significant boost to get to that same place. As we've moved forward, we've thought, wait a minute, what about that fence? How do we move from equality to equity to barrier-free? How do we move that fence that's there in the first place for students? And so a lot of the things that we've talked about around universal design for learning, really supporting access points for students has been around how do we remove those barriers? And then the last picture there really moves us to our goal now is supporting all students in inclusivity, that not only are they having access to the game, but they're playing and they have different sizes of uniforms, whatever it is that they need to really be a part of the game together.
So in looking at this, our purpose is just to give you some examples of what these federal programs are and how we work with them, with the intention that then you can ask us specific questions this evening, or if you have an area that you'd like us to look at more deeply for you, we can come back and do that. But when we talk about the district goal of growing student achievement, and while also eliminating opportunity and achievement gaps. That means rather than having the bar set in a static place and then looking at your programs to see that all students can work with that, the goal is to rather keep the rigor high for students while also closing the gap. And the example that we thought could just give you an idea of what we work towards and how we use data in doing that, if you look at the four-year graduation rate percentages, you can see that you have what we have for all students. And then you also look at students who have an IEP, and that would be students in special education, students who are emerging bilinguals or who are in our English language development program, and then our talented and gifted students, because all of these are examples of programs. And they're also examples of the way these rates are reported in any kind of data collection. And, there's a couple of caveats. The language learners, that's a changing group. So, when you look at whether there's growth in achievement, but then some students, because you work with them to develop their English, they leave that group. And that often happens by the time, students work towards high school. So that's one thing to remember when you look at data for that group, that you're not looking at the same children every year. Just to give you a rough idea, the number of students in gifted education this year who would be in high school would be about 75. So when you look at a graduation rate like that, you're looking at about 3 students. So those are just things to kind of remember when we're looking at that. But if you look at for example, the students with an IEP, and you look at 2011, 2012, and then look at 2016, 2017, that would be an example of closing the gap, but also the overall graduation rate means we want to raise what all students are doing. And that's why we chose that. I mean, we are looking to do that within all of our achievement areas, but the graduation rate is just a way to show that, for the last 6 years. Another model that we use a lot is this idea of all planning, all professional learning works around this idea of all students, some students, and few students. So instead of having something that would work generally and then having a different program, everything is nested in the all. And this whole idea of when we talk about a structure like workshop, that means what Director Hydes mentioned, where there's a very clear, well-articulated learning target. And the idea of that is the teacher has planned, this is actually what all students need to know and to be able to do. And every student works with that. Then, of course, there are some students who may already have demonstrated that they have learned that, and they need extension, and they need to go further than that, and there are other students who need more supports for access so that they can work with that learning target. We're using the example of reading here because you can looking at comprehension, and then also the whole idea of spelling, phonics, and vocabulary is an example. All children will learn how to work with the code in reading, but then when you get to some students, not everyone finds that to be easy right away, and some of our program work is with students who might need more explicit teaching of reading and writing. Later on, you'll be hearing more about dyslexia legislation and work with that, but this would be an example, is there are some students who need specific work. So we have an overall curriculum and instruction approach in reading. We have a document that we have actually created in the area of word study that includes phonics, spelling, vocabulary, that then looks at how do you get more specific for some students. And then finally, you might need some very specially designed instruction for students who need support, sometimes one-on-one support, small group support, and there might even be modification and access tools used. So that would be an example of doing that. But when we say inclusivity, all children are working towards those learning targets, and that doesn't vary for any student.
We wanted to give you just a bit of an overview of just even how many students are we talking about in our district who are participating or benefiting from these different sorts of programs, and what are some of the main ways we think about how students are served. So you can see our 2 biggest programs that students are supported with. Here are gifted education and special education. And in both of those, we do some individualized assessment and planning, and differentiation within the classroom is our primary learning space. We may add to that as needed for students, but again, that all plays how do we make that classroom learning be very accessible, challenging, appropriate for that individual student's work there. In terms of the other numbers that you see here, some may be much smaller. For example, we currently have 38 students who are supported through McKinney-Vento or homeless supports in our district, but that's a really critically important program for those students. So the number of students involved with it doesn't translate to how important that is. Each one of these is critical for the students that need it at that time. We have different programs here, might have more or less staff connected with the program directly, but what is critical in no matter how the services are provided is that it is in that nested and inclusive way rather than a separate siloed program.
Just the asterisk by the Title I numbers, there's a formula for looking at who would be served and can be served, but the number of children and who the children are do not stay the same. We focus on literacy instruction here, and the idea of that is that someone might need that support to be reading and writing at grade level, and then they might not need it. And sometimes within a school year, a child will no longer need it. So that 634 is sort of a, this is as large as it would get number based on that formula.
So no matter which of those programs we're talking about, we really have a very similar approach, that we think about that child, their parent, and their classroom teachers as being at the center of the work. And that doesn't change. No matter what additional supports they may need, that stays the center of the work. We think about oftentimes teacher teams may be a next level of support. So sometimes, for example, before if a teacher begins to have some inquiry about a student's rate of learning or how they're accessing learning, they might not immediately recommend, in fact, they wouldn't immediately recommend the student for a special education evaluation. They would first do some inquiry with their teacher team saying, here's what I'm noticing, here's some data I've gathered, give me some ideas and some supports about what I might try for that student. And then the next step would be to have some sort, and of course this would change by the program, but some sort of assessment or evaluation if we still had inquiry about that student. So whether, we have assessments that are part of the gifted education program, we have assessments that we think about in ELD and how we establish if a student needs English language development. We have assessments to determine if a student needs homeless services, and they may not, those aren't standardized psychological assessments, but it's a way of assessing, are they homeless and do they need some support? And then whatever program outlines those processes, so then some additional supports come around that student, not to take the student out of the classroom, but to bring in that broader circle of support to work with the teacher, with the student, with the parents, to really provide that support in a holistic way. And it's pretty exciting for us that it does feel that coherent and same across, even though what an assessment might look like and what the services might look like, of course, is going to differ depending on the needs of the students, but the approach is coherent across all of those programs. We also have a lot of strategies and practices that are very similar across these programs. And again, who may be involved with them may be different. But in all of these programs, we're doing a lot of observations and feedback, sometimes through formal learning walks. I'm going to be out at Westland High School tomorrow morning with a learning walk around a cycle of inquiry for the special education team and special education instructional coordinator, saying, how at Westland High School is special education working for students right now? Let's do a learning walk very similar to the ones we've seen. Gather some evidence to come alongside those quantitative kinds of evidence that we gather that we use for decision making. Strategic use of technology, and big shout outs to our partners in that work. It is very exciting to be part of a district that is always having that lens, and as technology continues to develop, it has been such a game changer for so many of our students in terms of access and support, whether it's language translations for a student who moves in that has primary language that is not English and not Spanish and not Chinese, but that we can now gather some technology to help have some access points for those students. Or at some point, I hope to come back and show you some more about what we're doing around augmentative and assistive communication for students who have oral language challenges. It's will knock your socks off, people. It's awesome. There's so many things happening in our district right now around augmentative communication. And all of that, it depends on this effective collaboration. I remember some of the questions that you asked when our building principals with Dr. Downs and Dr. Pryor presented about their cycles of inquiry. And so much was brought up about effective collaboration. And it's so much about how we work, but you don't see that in any place any more clearly than when it's around program support, children supported through these programs. When you're not moving a child to another place to get those services, it's all about collaboration. That high quality professional learning, and again, sometimes it is embedding. One of the things that Dr. Soyson does incredibly well is embedding. If we're doing lesson studies for mathematics, how are we planning math lessons for students who English is not their first language? In the front end, when we're talking about lesson planning, not as an ELD workshop, but for everyone. And then also sometimes having those specific professional growth or learning that's about more specific strategies. So I better move on. I'm talking too much, so let's go on to the next one. So as we move forward, we have a lot to be excited about and things we're still learning and trying to improve. We certainly want to keep deepening our coherence in how we use student data. We've come a long way in that over these last few years, but there's still more to learn. Some exciting work even that we have been thinking about with what Dr. Ludwig shared earlier about ways to not only gather that quantitative, but the student voice in their experience in these programs of support. How is that feeling to them, and how do we learn from that? We have some wonderful examples of great success happening for students in grade levels. There are some things we're still trying to bring to scale and really think about what do we need to replicate or adapt those practices. How do we continue to improve those access points for students and that sense of belonging for every single student who walks in our doors? One thing that's going to be nice about that wellness survey, it does ask some school climate questions, so we're going to be excited to see how those align with some of our work here. And finally, how do we continue to engage our stakeholders? We've heard some things, whether it was with parent nights around the dual language night. We have a really small but mighty parent group, parent and district collaboration group around special education. There's different ways that we elicit that parent input in each of those different programs. But we want to continue to deepen that and think about our overall program effectiveness and continue to improve so that these programs are helping us get to our district mission.
Too specific, I'm going to ask Dr. Spencer Iams. She has kind of an areas of focus handout, right? I thought she did, but or if she will, Kelly will email it, because it's an example kind of specifically when we say that we want to continue working with improvement. This is something where you see the things listed there, change and develop. We are specifically working with gifted education this year. We're looking at our identification again of all students and especially underserved students and making sure that those practices are in place. We're also looking at strengthening our practices, what they actually are. So that's, the focus this year in those two areas. But I think that document too would also reflect that. So do you have specific questions now or things you'd like us to elaborate on?
I'm going to submit that we are at, 5 minutes to 9. So I would encourage board members to ask those questions or provide feedback, but to do it by email afterwards or through Dr. Ludwig with a phone call or something. Yeah, thank you.
Chair Fitch, I'm just going to go ahead and we'll pass this out to you, and it's an example of some of the ways we try to work together We've had consistent focus areas in terms of special education, and that's just one of the examples of programs that align. We expect you would see a lot of coherence, but also specificity. That's on this side of it. On the other side is a nice little infographic about some of our beliefs that continue to move us forward in terms of the inspirational parts of those work.
All right, thank you very much for your preparation.
I'd just like to say thank you for that very thorough presentation. I've had wonderings around some of these things, and this encapsulated and captured most of those. So thank you very much.
So again, Mr. Middlestetter, if you can quickly move us through your...
I can be real quick. I have no comments. If you have any questions, you have a memo, a short memo on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that moves us to me, which is the city of West Linn is desperate to have a work session with us, which is a good thing.
I apologize. It's Betty. I was on mute. I did have a question about the RFP and when it's expected that the contract will be awarded for the auditor, for the new audit firm.
We are on schedule with the schedule that was presented at our last meeting. I don't have that right in front of me, but it would be at the next board meeting. We hope to have everything wrapped up and to come before the board for decision and award at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
We've had problems scheduling a work session. The city of West Linn believes that April 16th works for them. However, I have concerns. I just think that there's some board work that we might want to do at a work session coming up, and we need some time to do that. So I guess I'm a little reluctant to give over that time for a joint work session, but I'm really open to hearing what everyone has to say.
I trust your judgment on that one. It's been a while since I feel like, dug into some good board work, although we had a good last work session as well. Food for thought, if that was the direction you were considering going. And I don't know what the practicality or feasibility would be, but I'm not certain we necessarily would need to do this during a actual school year. Our summer, we tend to not have as heavy of a meeting schedule, and maybe July isn't a bad idea or something like that.
And I was going to say, I emailed you today. I'm not sure if you got it, but I will be out of the country on April 16th if that influences your decision one way.
I can make April 16th work as well. So I think, Ginger, you're in a great position because you've been scheduling. You know what's on our work session and some of the topics we want to tackle. I don't have that in front of me. And I feel like you and probably Chelsea should confer on that, and then we would follow your lead because you're in the best position to evaluate it, along with Dr. Ludwig.
Maybe while we're waiting to see if there's response there, I could share that Chair Fitch and I did meet regarding agenda items for that joint session next week with the City of Wilsonville. We're still waiting to hear, I believe, on topics on their end, but the three that we suggested, one is a short update from me on the high school study, bringing them into the conversation around, very similar to what you heard me present to the Rotary group, so that that group feels included in the conversation and understands the scope of that work and an opportunity to maybe hear from them around the assets that they feel they have as a community and how they see themselves engaged in that. The second would be examples of how we're leading together, and I've mentioned before that the 2 city librarians have been connecting and doing some joint work across the 2 cities, as well as with our teacher librarians. And I know they'd like an opportunity to highlight some of that, and we would as well. So that would be a small topic, or just an acknowledgement of that work and partnership. And then lastly, just the growing concern across the state as well as Clackamas County around mental health support. And Chair Fitch and I talked about presenting that together so that there's some joint voice there, that as we advocate, whether they're city council or a school board or a school district, how we make known that mental health supports for students is really important and increasingly important. And so we'll have some information to share there, and how it connects to our goals and our current work with students, and provide that. So those are the 3 topics, very short each, and then have some discussion there. And then we've shared those with them, and as far as I've heard, they're pleased with those and may add another topic or 2 on their end.
All right, we will close our meeting. Thank you very much.